First story, I started when I was 22 years old in United Way as a management trainee, an intern at United Way of America. I got placed in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. I was in my office around lunchtime one day, having my usual lunch when I was 22 years old, a Whopper from Burger King and a Coke. Doug Ashby, the president and CEO of the United Way in Forsyth County in Winston-Salem, walks into my office and says, "Do you want to go to a leadership rally at RJR Tobacco?" Our biggest account in Winston-Salem at that time. Of course I did. I jumped up, ran down the hall with Doug, down the elevator, onto the street in the only set of business clothes as I thought them, I had, that I brought from Northwest Indiana. A pair of brown hush puppy shoes, brown polyester pants, a brown shirt, a brown tie, a brown corduroy jacket. Eating my Whopper, drinking my Coke, walking down the street, Doug looks over at me and he says, "My God, look at you." Throw that stuff away. There's a men's store we're walking by as we're headed toward RJR Tobacco, Norman Stockton. He says, "Tomorrow, we're going to Norman Stockton. We're opening up an account for you. You're going to buy a couple of suits. You're going to get some shoes. You're going to get some shirts. You're going to get some ties. You're going to start dressing like a professional and because you'll act as you dress." He didn't have to take an interest in me. He didn't have to take me to that meeting. He didn't have to get in my face in the right way about what it meant to be a professional, but he did it because he cared about me. When I was working for the United Way of Southeastern New England in Providence, Rhode Island, Mark O'Connell, who was the president and CEO in Atlanta at the time, called. We had met earlier that year and asked if I would come and take the campaign director's job in Atlanta. And I said, "Mark, I've run so many campaigns now, I really don't want to run any more campaigns. I really got into United Way about community. You know, it's nice to be able to raise money." And he said, "Brian, would you be willing to enter into a conversation about a social contract that we'll have an agreement? It'll be built on trust, it'll be built on mutual respect. If you'll come and take this position, I'll help you with assignments inside the organization, opportunities in the community. We'll help you get your MBA so you can move on to the next level." He lived up to every part of that social contract. I think I lived up to my part of that social contract, but what Mark taught me was you don't always need employment agreements. You don't always need it in black and white. Sometimes you just need to trust each other, mutually respect each other, commit to each other, and good things happen. I went from Atlanta to be the CEO of the United Way in Central Ohio, Columbus, Ohio. And like a lot of those kind of changes, you come into that environment after 3 or 4 or 5 years of pretty tumultuous times. There was a lot of churn. Janet Jackson, who's the current United Way CEO in Columbus, was a board member at the time. In fact, she was on the search committee that hired me to come to Columbus. Once I accepted the position, got to Columbus, Janet invited me to lunch, sat down and schooled me on the politics of United Way, the politics of race in Columbus, the politics just generally in Columbus, and mentored me through my first 18 months. She did everything that she knew she had to do to make sure that I was successful. Janet now is a mutual mentor, a mutual coach, and a great friend. My point is that we need each other. Professional development starts very early in our career, travels through our career, remains a responsibility as we go later into our career, and it's what makes us professionals. And as United Way pros, the world has never needed you more than we need you today. You know, it's always been a privilege and it's humbling to be in this position, quite honestly. And this is the 6th opportunity that I've had to address a national audience for United Way. You know, 6 years, or at least 5.5 years, given, you know, the tenuous nature of the life expectancy of the United Way of America president, is a pretty good run, I would say. No, I'm not looking for cheap applause. But I thought about, in 2002, the first time I had this opportunity, the first time I had this privilege, and I started thinking about what were we talking about 5 and 5.5 years ago. We focused on a few things. We talked about our core business. We made a commitment together that we're in the business to change people's lives, that we exist to improve people's lives by changing the conditions in which they live. Fundraising, public policy, everything else we do is to that end. We talked about confidence. I remember a phrase that we used in Indianapolis in 2002 was, we need to get a strut back in our stride. We had lost our confidence, in my estimation, and we called ourselves to that kind of action. We talked a lot about how do we drive resources to the impact work. You know, we've been so separate in terms of how we ran our campaigns and our resource development efforts, and then the community planning and the community initiatives were on the other side. We talked about how do we drive those things together. And finally, we talked a lot about how do we move beyond human services. You know, the answer to every issue, every problem, every opportunity in a community coming from a social worker is not another group of social workers. Sometimes, if we want to deal with family violence, you do it through good public policy. You do it through dealing with the court system. You deal with it through education and marketing campaigns. Sometimes it's brick and mortar that has to go into creating housing opportunities. And we talked about the need to not feel boxed in just about thinking about human services. And so as I think about where we are today, and if I would put it, if I could, in kind of the, what's the state of the movement right now, I would suggest to us that things are really pretty good. That you and we together have made a lot of progress over the last 5 or 6 years, but we also have some incredible challenges in front of us that I think we ought to take this new sense of confidence and institutional success and put it to work against that. Let's first think about the progress over the last 5 or 6 years. We don't argue about mission anymore. 90% of all local United Ways say that you're in the business to change people's lives. We're in the business to impact people's lives. Everything else has to align with that. Reputation has improved dramatically over the last 5 or 6 years. Trust in United Way is up. Donor satisfaction is up. Favorability numbers in United Way are up across the country. And a third-party endorsement that I take pretty seriously is a professor and an academic named Paul Light. Paul works at NYU. He studies nonprofit management and governance, trust and accountability. In a report that Paul published recently on a national scale, he said if you look at all of the nonprofits in the US right now, probably the best bellwether of trust and confidence in the sector is United Way. Because what United Way is doing right now in getting focused on results and getting focused on issues that people care about is what drives trust and confidence. And the trust and confidence in United Way is going up. And if trust and confidence in United Way is going up because they're focused on community, not just particular interests, the rest of the sector will go with it. It's important to us, but it's important to the entire sector. We're growing again. 3 years in a row, top-line revenue growth for United Way is up. As importantly, from my perspective, a term that we're starting to use more and more is resources under your management. Do you have the discretion to spend the money that gets raised is up as a percentage and total dollars across the system. Now almost 77% of all dollars under your management. After 10 years in a row of donors passing their money through you to their favorite agency, that's now declined and dropped, and the amount of money that donors are investing in you on issue products like early childhood and education initiatives and housing initiatives are up. You've shifted the revenue paradigm. We're starting to see more and more impact. When I thought back 4 or 5 years ago as we were making these kind of remarks, they were pretty aspirational. We talked about what might be possible. I look back at Columbus, there's 1,000 new units of affordable housing in Columbus over the last 5 and 6 years. Brand new units of affordable housing in Denver. Closing the achievement gap between white kids and kids of color in the 3rd grade completely in Madison, Wisconsin. Dropping dramatically the truancy rate in Burlington schools in Burlington, Vermont. Kids showing up ready to learn in tough neighborhoods in Charlotte, North Carolina. We now have example after example of what you're doing. There's impact that now can get tied to the work that we're about. 211. In 2002, 18% of all Americans had access to 211. Today it's almost 70%, almost 200 million Americans have access to 211. We together launched Born Learning in May of 2005. Since May of 2005, 1.6 million parents or caregivers have gotten direct information on how to do their jobs. How do I become my child's first teacher? 1.6 million direct fulfillment through your work and our partners.